everyone. Today I'd like to talk about mainstream parenting styles and really kind of what the difference is and the things that we don't do from mainstream parenting styles in gentle parenting. Good morning everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Kat Moore, and if you're returning, it is so good to see you. How are you doing? Awesome. Before we get started, if you're not really familiar with gentle parenting and what I'm talking about, I really suggest that you watch this video right here. I believe it's here. Or is it here? I can't remember. One of these two, you're going to see a video pop up. So it'll be either here or here. And that will go over kind of the basics of what gentle parenting is and the philosophy that this parenting style is based around. So in that video, I really kind of went over the philosophies of gentle parenting and the things that we do that are different. But today I really want to look at what we don't do so that you know what not to do with your children if you are looking to start gentle parenting as opposed to doing the typical mainstream parenting that we were raised with. I'm also going to be going into some of the specific reasons why we don't see those things as gentle over in the Facebook group that I admin on, Gentle Parents Unite. We have over 70,000 members of parents of all different types looking for advice and connecting more deeply with their children. So I really recommend that you join that space if you're not already a member. It is a wonderful community if you're just starting out. So when we look at mainstream parenting styles and the views that they take on children, we often see things like that children are just pushing boundaries, that they're testing their limits, they're generally misbehaving, being disrespectful. There's a lot of different things that we say about children in the mainstream thought process that is a lot different when you're looking at it from a more gentle parenting perspective, because it takes into account the science of their brain development and what they really are capable of and not just what we think they should be. One of the most common phrases in mainstream parenting that in my experience anyway, are things like children need boundaries to feel safe, or control your children. If you've heard that one while your child was having a meltdown in public, go ahead and click that like button. I think we can all relate to that. But why is that the view that is held on children when science says otherwise? This is based largely in really old science on behaviorism theory. Behaviorism theory was originally found by testing on animals and then on humans. And in my opinion, the studies are extremely flawed. They don't look at long-term at all. It's really just in that moment, which isn't a very effective way of looking at child development at all. So based on behaviorism theory, the belief is that positive reinforcement conditions people to behave desirable ways, whereas negative reinforcement can stop undesirable behaviors. The flaw with this, though, is that it's not necessarily true. Just think of yourself, for example. How many times has something negative happened to you, but you either still want to do the thing or you've gone on to continue making the same mistake repeatedly? This isn't a flaw in our genetic makeup. It's not a flaw in our brains. It's a flaw in the science that went into this that was the thought that we would have the same capacity as animals. Another huge flaw is that it does not take into consideration one of my biggest mottos, and it's even on the back here. I don't know if you can see it because it's a little bit blurry, but behavior is communication, and that is so important. All behavior is not just a thing that you should stomp out or change to suit your desires. We should be trying to figure out what the behavior is communicating. That way we can address that need and prevent the behaviors from happening in the future, while also teaching them how to better manage those situations as their brain develops enough for them to be able to do that on their own. Behaviorism theory and positive reinforcement and negative reinforcement, they're also extremely coercive, and coercion is not how you inspire cooperation or confidence or trust with people. In fact, coercion breaks all of those things without a doubt. If you feel, even if someone's trying to get you to do something in a nice way, do you feel good about it? Or do you just feel like someone's trying to get you to do what they want you to do and you don't really want to? People don't like to be controlled. And the same applies to children, especially to children, because they don't understand the control paradigms that we have had conditioned and pounded into our brains for so long. And like I said, it's also really based in short-term goals. When you're just trying to stop a behavior like hitting or yelling or throwing things, you're not looking at a long-term solution. You're only just trying to stop it right then and there. And that does not work for the long term. That usually only works in that moment, if at all, because there are definitely children who nothing will work to stop the behavior when they're that upset. Instead of trying to stop the behavior in that moment, we should be trying to do things that will ultimately affect the way children are able to interact with their world in the long term. And by stopping behavior in the moment, we are not able to take advantage of that moment in order to teach them the skills that they will need to learn. Stopping behavior doesn't teach skills, it just teaches them that what they're doing and how they're expressing themselves is not acceptable. So we really got to work to try and counteract that when it comes to undoing all of this conditioning. A good example of this is that many adults end up at the end of their rope when they can't find anything that works. And I know I keep using the air quotes for it, but that's because it's what it has become in my mind, in the context that I'm using it. Because in order to make this shift and in order to connect and actually have an impact on your child, you kind of have to shift what that word works means for you. It's not easy, it is challenging, so I'd like to share with you a little bit of my story and how I got here, because this was the biggest turning point for me in changing my parenting to where I am now, where I'm not fighting with my child every single day, where we actually are connecting and she has opened up to me about things that I never could have imagined before. So when I started this journey, I was in the pits. I was absolutely at the lowest that I could possibly be. I was not a very good parent to my child. I was really struggling. We had just had our son. He was only a couple of months old. My daughter, she was 4 and had just started school, and she was being sent home every single day because of behavioral challenges. We were screaming at her every day. She was screaming at us. It got to a point where I had to take a really hard look at myself and say, this isn't okay anymore. This wasn't okay at all, but I have got to a point where things were starting to get a little too physical, and I had to make changes in order to understand her a little bit better. When I first started working on it, I had already gone into it with the idea that I had tried empathy before and it just didn't work. I had tried everything before and nothing worked. I had tried the timeouts, I had tried reward charts, I had tried praising her for every possible thing that she did wonderful. I had tried giving her choices. I had done everything that people typically suggest to parents to do. It would get to the point where if I made a post in the parent group that I was a part of at the time, all of the answers were things I had already done, and I didn't know where else to go from there. I was completely at a loss. When I was at the hospital to give birth to my son, there was a bookstore in the hospital. So I found a book that was called The Explosive Child. At first, when I started reading it, I really liked the ideas that I saw in it, but I was having a hard time understanding it and putting it into action. And there comes a point in the book where they actually ask you to write up this assessment and that's kind of where I got stuck. I stopped reading it at that point. Things just went on as normal, which was not a good thing. It was yelling, it was screaming. Things were getting worse because now we had a new baby and she was feeling the issues from that as well. And things were just getting to the point where I was asking myself, how am I going to manage? How am I going to survive the next 18 years with this child? How am I supposed to do this? I didn't know how I was going to get through the next day, let alone her entire life. It was, the end wasn't in sight. There was no silver lining. I'm getting emotional just talking about it because it was a really hard time. I couldn't figure out what to do. Nothing was working. So I picked the book back up and I started reading it because I didn't know what else to do. And I decided that when I got to that point where it made you do the assessment, I was just going to keep reading, because I never even really got to figure out what the method in the book was because I got stuck on this part. I never got to dive into more of what this book was supposed to tell you to do. As I read through this book, which basically is your guide to problem solving as well as changing a perspective, the first thing that stood out to me was kids do well when they can. That was really hard for me to accept. Up until that point, I had thought that my daughter was just not empathetic and I had thought she was this bad person. This 4-year-old was a bad person. I'm still getting emotional. I'm sorry. Don't mind me. And then I started to realize as I was reading the book that she wasn't a bad person, that she was doing the best that she could. She just didn't have the skills to do any better. She couldn't handle those situations any better, even if she wanted to, and that somewhere deep inside, she really did want to handle it better. At first, this was really, really hard for me to accept. So I started listening to podcasts and drilling it into my head, and that's when I joined the parenting group, Gentle Parents Unite. I joined it in March of 2020, and I began asking questions. I began looking for help, and I was told the same thing that I will often tell you: empathize, connect, and empathize. But it wasn't working. She was still continuing to be upset. She was still continuing to do the behaviors. So I made a post and I said, I have tried empathizing and it doesn't work. My colleague in the group, Melody, said to me that empathy isn't supposed to work. It's not supposed to stop them from doing the thing. It's not supposed to stop them from feeling the way that they feel. It's not something that you're supposed to give with a goal. It's supposed to be support. And that was a huge thing for me. So I really encourage you to change your definition of what's working from what's working to control the child, because they are people. They don't need to be controlled. I know that it's hard to accept because they're children and we get this idea in our head that we need to control them to keep them safe, but that is not the case. We can find other ways to keep them safe without controlling and then pulling our hair out because we can't find anything that's working to do that with certain children. Another part of the reason that I had to do this was because my child was not connecting the punishment to the behavior. And that is why what I'm about to go into is a lot of the types of punishment that is used in mainstream parenting. That's what we don't do in gentle parenting. And I would like to share with you what those are, why we don't do them, so that you can go forward and try to stop doing these things for yourself. But I would like you to also give yourself some empathy and forgiveness if you don't find it as easy to stop these things as just stopping it like that. Because these are systems that you've been raised with and that you have done for so long that it is not easy to just stop everything. The first thing, and this one is widely known and somehow yet still debated, widely known as being damaging, and that will be spanking. Spanking is violence. It doesn't really matter what the reason is. You are physically taking your hand to strike a child. You are causing them pain with the intention of stopping them from doing something. This does not teach. I don't know where the connection becomes that it's going to teach somebody something, but when you look at what teaching is and learning does not come from feeling pain and then trying to avoid that thing, especially when you're considering impulse control and mental development, all of those things. Spanking is extremely damaging to trust and connection with the parents. It can also cause people to believe that that's something that they deserve, that if they do something wrong, they deserve to be punished for it. Multiple studies show that children who are spanked have increased chances of being depressed, having violent tendencies, suicide, alcoholism, drug abuse. Spanking is a common theme in a lot of mental health problems that people are struggling with as they grow older, and even just in your own self-worth. A lot of people will say, I was spanked and I'm fine. But I think that the fact that we say that is a sign that we're not. I know that when I was saying that, I wasn't looking really deeply at myself. I was in denial of the fact that I have trust issues, that I have self-confidence issues, that I'm not comfortable speaking my truth to people, that I'm not comfortable telling people my opinions or my thoughts. because I'm used to them being shut down. So it takes a lot of self-insight to be able to admit that spanking did affect you. And I really encourage everyone to sit and think and really, really deeply think of what ways could it have affected you. It also teaches children, and I know that this is often debated, but I've seen it in my own child, that it can teach children that when somebody does something wrong, they need to be punished for it. The part of the problem that we were having in school was that my daughter was hitting her classmates when they would not listen to the teacher. If she saw them as having done something wrong, she would hit them for it because she was getting spanked if she did something wrong. It really does teach some children, maybe not every child, but it still can teach that subconscious message that if you do something wrong, you deserve to be punished, as opposed to trying to figure out why someone may have done that, or maybe greeting it with empathy or in a more compassionate manner. This one's going to actually surprise quite a few people that we don't do this, but rewards. Rewards are not in line with gentle parenting because they are coercive. Rewards are used as punishment oftentimes. Let's say, for example, who were told that if they went on the potty all day, that at the end of the day they would get a sticker. But if they have that accident and they have that experience and they don't get that sticker, they will be just as upset as if you deprived them or punished them for something. You are offering them this tantalizing little thing, and then if they can't meet up to your expectation, then we just take it away. And that is a punishment. It feels like a punishment to them. Many children will start to cry if they don't get that sticker or reward that they expected to get, because that was a sign that they were acceptable and they did something the way that they were supposed to. Plus, they got really excited about that thing. It really ingrains in children to do things for what they can get out of it, as opposed to doing it just because they want to. That intrinsic motivation is something that we as gentle parents really want to foster and encourage within our children. And by offering bribes or rewards, it's actually going to have the exact opposite effect. They will learn that if they do something desirable, they get something for it. So the only reason that they have to do something like that is to get something, and if they don't, then they might even become the type of adults who, when they do something for someone, get mad because they didn't do something in return. Whereas we really want to create generous people who are giving for the goodness of their hearts and not giving for the recognition. And it also gives a message that they need to behave a certain way to be acceptable. And that's what all punishments really give, is that if they're not behaving a certain way, they're not acceptable. We say that we love our children unconditionally, but then we take away that love when they do something wrong. At least in their eyes. For us, we think that us putting them in timeout or punishment is a form of love. But a child's not going to see spanking or timeout as a loving gesture. It's not a hug, it's not connecting, it's isolating, and it's humiliating, and it's shaming. There's nothing about those gestures that feel loving to the child. So regardless of what your intention is in doing them, we really have to think about what the impact is as opposed to what we intended it to be. Another example is taking away privileges or possessions. That is something that we do not do as gentle parents. Those possessions, they belong to that person. When we look at children as full human beings with the exact same human rights that we have. We would not go up to someone and take away their iPad because we felt like they were on it for too long. We wouldn't go and take away somebody's possessions because they slighted us or made us feel frustrated. Those are just not ways that we treat human beings, and that's a lot of what we look at when we're trying to figure out what we do and don't do with children. If you're not going to do it to an adult, then don't do it to the kid. We don't do timeouts. We often prefer to do what we call a time in, where we will take the child and separate from the situation and sit down with them and offer them support and empathy as they're processing and working through whatever they're feeling in that moment. A timeout is the opposite of that. We put them in a place and we leave them there and we walk away, and they have to sit there and try to kind of figure out how to deal with it themselves without ever being taught how. So instead of dealing with it, they kind of just get distracted because they're not going to be thinking about the thing that we want them to think about. And sometimes they're just going to continue to get more escalated, as was the case with my child. She would get more and more escalated and refuse to sit in that timeout. Some children just simply will not stay. It doesn't matter how many times you put them back in. It doesn't matter how firm you are. There are just some children who won't do it. And finally, I'm just going to talk and touch a little bit on logical and imposed consequences. So these are things like you threw the ball, so the ball has to be put away. Or we can't go outside until you put your boots on. Those are logical consequences that we impose on the child. They are often mistaken for natural consequences because we see that if we remove the thing that they are doing, that it's a natural consequence. But I am going to go into a little bit more about natural consequences and what they actually are in my next video. Today I am talking more about what we don't want to do, but a quick summary basically is that natural consequences you cannot do to a person. Natural consequence is just what happens. All of these different techniques come from a doing to approach as opposed to a working with approach, as said by Alfie Kohn in several of his books. I will link down below as well, along with the link to Explosive Child, in case you want to take a look into that. It's really important, I think, to remember that children's first interactions with the world and with society and with social norms is in how we treat them. So a lot of people think that we need to crack down on them right away in order to prevent them from doing those things in the future. And I argue that by doing that, we're teaching them and conditioning them to accept abuse, emotional, I'm not necessarily saying you're physically abusing your child, but or even emotionally abusing your child, but I would suggest that these things can lead to patterns where they will allow themselves to be abused by people in the future because they believe that if they do something wrong, they deserve punishment for it. They believe that these are the things that are just how the world works. And if we are able to approach it from a totally different standpoint of connection and working with them, then they will learn how to collaborate and work with others as opposed to trying to just control what other people are doing as well. They also can have more compassion and empathy for people when they are modeled that, because they will learn how to give that in more effective ways. I think we forget that children do what we do, not what we say. In the long run, children learn more from watching us, and we see it. We see it in the way that all of a sudden you'll hear something that your child says and you're like, oh boy, that came from me. It's not because we told them to do that. They learn by watching us because they want to be like us. We are their role models. We are their parents, and it is up to us to model as opposed to just trying to tell them what they need to do. I know when I was a child that if I was punished for something, it didn't stop me from doing that thing. It got me more creative. I either started to lie or find ways to get around the consequence, and that's honestly what punishing does. A lot of people will call this discipline. Discipline is not something you can do to somebody. It is a skill that develops inside yourself. So just remember that when we talk about positive discipline, we're not talking about doing discipline to them in a positive way. We are talking about teaching them self-discipline in a positive way. So this is obviously going to leave the question of, well, what the hell can I do if I can't punish my kid or if I can't discipline my child? I've tried talking to them and that doesn't work. I say it that way because I've said it like that. It comes down to what the goal of your parenting is. Are you trying to raise children into the adults that they're going to be, or trying to control their behavior in the moment? The term "it doesn't work" needs to take on a new meaning. If the term work is in how much you're connecting with your child, then empathy is always what will work. Empathy also does, in the end, over time, in the long run, it does accomplish what in the moment traditional parenting is trying to. Behaviors will stop on their own or through a more supportive environment. Those behaviors typically come because that child doesn't feel supported. Honestly, in trying to stop behaviors, we often just kind of perpetuate them and encourage them further without even realizing it. This is not an easy mindset to adopt, and I really, really do understand that. And I know that I, for myself, needed to have my hand held as I was going through this journey, especially in the very beginning when I was trying to completely shift my perspective of everything. So if you are looking for additional support or help, I highly recommend that you check out my website down below or go to that Gentle Parents Unite Facebook page. There is a membership plan there as well with some very amazing parent coaches as well there who have helped me on my journey. And I really recommend that anyone who is struggling with these techniques and applying this to look into the options that you have for support, because it is not easy to do it completely alone, especially when you don't know anything better. You are not broken, you are not messed up, there's nothing wrong with you if you are not able to just stop everything you're doing and be gentle. That's just, honestly, that's not even realistic at all. It's a long process, and I want to be here to help you through that. So please reach out to me if you need any help. I will be here next Tuesday with my video on natural consequences and kind of what to do and how will children learn without imposing these consequences. Thank you so much for coming to watch. Make sure you click subscribe and the little bell so you don't miss next week's video. See you next Tuesday.